Thank you very much, ECOLOPES team, for the invitation and for this kind introduction. I feel like I could already skip my first slides now. Actually, you're spot on the 30 years. Early next year, we will have the 30-year anniversary at MVRDV. So yes, let's begin. I have a lot of slides, so the earlier I start showing stuff, the better it is for my timeline. So this is the title that was announced for this lecture. As I said, as introduced, my name is Stuckardt. I've been working for MVRDV in some capacity for the last 8 years, around 8 years. I had a sabbatical in between at Stuckardt Institute in Moscow. There's a postgraduate program on called The New Normal, so more on the research side, but on and off it's been around 8 years. So the title that's introduced is basically what's MVRDV Next, and I'm trying to give an overview of digital tooling, so the way that we aim to improve the production of our architectural and urban design processes, but also under this ambition, of course, of maintaining agency of the tools that we as architects use. I mean, everyone in a way at some point today, there's this globalization of design tools from Rhino to the Autodesk Revit and so on that are used all over the world. So how can we make sure that we as architects retain a role in making the tools that we use? The second part, more on the research side, will be on the level of Datascapes, which is a term that was coined by one of our founders of MVRDV, Vinny Maas, in the early 2000s. And then the third part will be that I will try to talk about the relationship between speculative design, so basically the practical ambition of actually building stuff, the kind of pragmatic side of architecture. After reading the ECOLOPES project description, I kind of rephrased that the topic of this talk and focus it on building envelopes. So the talk now will be in two parts. The first part will be an introduction on MVRDV, and I guess a bit of a historical outlook in speculative and data-driven design approach, and then into the contextualization of how and why we founded MVRDV Next within this practice. The second part of the talk will give an overview of 5 different projects, 5 deep dives into architectural envelopes and urban envelopes. So let's dive right in. I will keep the MVRDV intro quite short. I think that a lot of this could be known already. So the office was founded in the early 90s by Vinny Maas, Jacob van Rijs, and Nathalie de Vries. We are now more than 300 people worldwide. It's a large network, and we also operate in many places in the world, let's say. So a lot of different cultural design contexts. We have a total of 4 offices. There's a 5th one that was just founded in September in New York. So I'm now joining you from Rotterdam, from our main office, but we have satellites in Paris, Shanghai, Berlin, which are established already, and now in the process of setting up this 5th one in New York. I think it was very interesting, Ferdinand, how you were talking about interdisciplinary work and the framework of the ECOLOPES project, because this is something that, of course, as an architectural practice, we also realize that now more than ever, we need to build these networks. And actually very similar things also happening in TU Delft, where I'm partially affiliated with, there's a lot of need, I guess, to include different expertise, especially in the process of digitalization and urban data models. And I will show more of this more concretely in the second part of the talk. This is our office from where I'm talking now. It's a national monument that was, the interior was refurbished by MVRDV. In the background, you can see these colorful meeting rooms. I'm in the least colorful one of all of them, in the black one. This is the office. We have a collective lunch table and 8 design studios that are loosely based on geographic regions. Some of the early projects that you might know is from, of course, the history of MVRDV is largely on the architectural scale, with projects like the VPRO Villa, the Expo Pavilion in Hanover that we're actually refurbishing at the moment, the Bozoko Home for the Elderly. And already in all of these kind of projects, we can see that a couple of the topics that will come back in the second part of the talk, which deal mainly with density, individuality, and diversity. Public buildings, we also built a lot of public buildings, and I think that the office generally puts a lot of effort into the engagement or the inclusion of a general public into the design and into the experience of architecture. This is the library in in China, and we also do a lot of urban projects and revitalization projects. This is the High Line in Seoul, former highway that was translated into this arboretum, or this collection of species. This is in Rotterdam, the depot. So that's the first accessible archive of a museum, of the Boijmans van Beuningen Museum, which is, yeah, you can basically enter it, but it's not a museum, it's not curated. It's objects there are stored by material properties and requirements for preservation. And we also, you might have seen photos of this building, the Markthal, which essentially, I guess, also is symptomatic for MVRDV's playful way to engage with architecture, where two residential slabs are bent and connected on the top to form or shelter this public space, which is a market underneath it. So all of these kind of projects together is what we're working on mainly. But on the other hand, we also publish research. We conduct research in partnerships, mainly with the Y Factory in the TU Delft, but also independent work and work with other institutions. And we publish this research in books. And yeah, this is a photo of the Y Factory where I studied, as well as later taught design studios and seminars. It's a master's program on visionary cities in Delft. And I will also, one of the deep dives will be a project that was conducted at this institute. And also the Y Factory publishes their research in books. So there's a lot of ambition to share and to get in dialogue with other institutions through the publication of these things, and also to package research in the form of narratives. I hope I can explain that also, or showcase that in the second part of the talk. The history of then just a few slides on us. So MVRDV NEXT is an acronym for New Experimental Technologies. So the keywords here, I think, is like we see that technology generally is one of the biggest game changers in the architectural industry in the last years, which poses opportunities and, of course, challenges and risks equally. And therefore, we recognized the need to have a dedicated research unit for this within the office. At MVRDV works on these kind of programs, architectural and urban programs. In a way, what we do is build workflows, computational models, scripts, but also standalone software to facilitate and reimagine these projects, and also to make them buildable and feasible. So at a larger scope. Okay, let's begin with the first part, looking back and contextualizing this. I would argue that the MVRDV, that it's not a coincidence that we founded this unit within MVRDV, because the office has a history of data-driven or speculations on the role of data in the city that precedes, I think, or that was quite visionary at the time. So in the early 2000s, there was a very radical project, which I think still today is an inspiration for us, called Metacity Data Town, which imagined a city entirely represented in data. So what is left if you remove any form of, that was the hope at the time, if you remove any form of subjectivity, any form of disagreements or different perspectives on the city, and you just look at what's measurable and you visualize it. Nowadays, of course, we know that data is not as objective, and that there was maybe this hope was to some extent in vain. But there's a radicality in it, and there's a new formal language also, I think, which still inspires us today. And equally important for us today is another project, Big City, which for me represents or explores in a very exciting way the relationship between architectural prototyping, so the idea of thinking of a building that actually represents a vision for the country. So in this case, the origin of this project is on a national level of the Netherlands, where this is again a data model of a GIS model of the country is used to quantify the amount of area that's used for agriculture, and then gradually compress that into these two locations where they envision these new architectures, which would be, I mean, I guess the Hanover Pavilion is then the realization of this vision, where architecture would essentially represent, architectural form would represent, in a way, a territorial scale strategy. Plus, like, of course, we offer these pics also some new qualities and views. And so all of these kind of speculations we can find in publications. These are some of the maybe most important ones in our mind, in our opinion, and we can see that this happened loosely around the 2000s for MVRDV. And what's interesting is that with these visions and these new speculative design scenarios, there was a need for visionary tools as well. So there was a need to design your own computational tools that can support and visualize and in a way enable these projects. Some of those, and they were really ranging again and going across all scales. There was the region maker, which essentially is a precursor to pixel-based GIS simulations today. On the architectural scale, there was in a way a prototype of a multiplayer space fighter, a negotiator for space in a virtual environment. On the architectural scale, if we zoom in on qualities, we have more recently the vertical village and the village maker, which was this, which was supporting one of the researchers into the densification of Asian cities while maintaining the informality and the diversity of rural settings. We can see that this is already a simulation envelope here in which daylight qualities as well as access, sunlight and structural requirements can be quantified in real time. And in a turn rate based strategy, people can place their envelopes and choose their own typologies in this. On the level of the house, I think we all know these kind of interfaces now from shopping websites. You have this parameter, what was called the house maker. So this was really the ambition of bringing an architecture to everyone and making like a very inclusive and participatory design process. And how can anyone become an architect or a designer? And yeah, design their own house, which later could be then placed within this village maker. But what we see, of course, like today, that back then it took a lot of effort, it took a lot of expertise to build these tools. Many of them were built on just regular Windows development frameworks. And what we see, of course, today is that these frameworks have changed a lot. And what you see on the screen right now is an overview of the tools that we work with, which I think at the core is Rhino and Grasshopper for parametric modeling in concept stages, and then for the later execution phases, Revit, so BIM modeling with Dynamo extensions. But we're also working more and more now with game engines like Unity and Unreal Engine and GIS, of course. So all of these tools start to talk to each other a lot more, and they enable us to build software prototypes within projects a lot faster. So this diagram I'm trying to show basically that nowadays for a single project we can do what I call instant tooling. We can develop tools within an hour, test them and apply them immediately in the project, adjust them, reconfigure them, and of course also transfer them from one project to the other, which is an effective way to transfer knowledge from one design team to another one as well within the company of 300 people. So before we go into the second part and into the deep dive of the talk, I just want to give a kind of general introduction of, okay, so what kind of tools do we do today, and what's the scope of MVRDV NEXT within the firm? Where on the one hand we work on design space exploration, so that's things like automation, for instance. This is a residential project in Paris where we brute forced all possible combinations of a set of 7 unique floor plans, which in the end gave this variation of, I think, more than 70,000 possible configurations. And then within that, we also developed this Design Space Explorer, which can basically allows you as a designer to draw a certain profile. So to prioritize quantifiable parameters and qualities of these design solutions according to GFA, of course, structural capacity and efficiency, views, daylight, but also costs and facade area. And we can see the blue line is drawn by a designer, and then the red line is the closest configuration that matches that profile. Then the second interest, and I will go again in more detail in the second part of the talk, is Datascapes. And I think there's a very intriguing way to deal with these datascapes in MVRDV, where we also use them as design drivers and really make the data experienceable within realized projects, such as the Floriade, which is a garden show similar to Gugas in Germany, but here they occur every 10 years. This one just closed in September this year, where over the last 8 years in preparation, we, together with different landscape designers from the municipality of Almere, as well as private commissioned firms, assembled this inventory of species, which were, I think, in the end, more than 2,500 unique species that were planted on this this grid in Almere, alphabetically sorted from A to Z. So here, the tool that we developed allowed us to test different configurations and to translate this Excel spreadsheet of data into different configurations and see how that can be arranged on the plan, how full is it at which point, how can we multiply species to extend it, and so on. But we also create, of course, our own datascapes. So this is a master plan that we did in Shenzhen for Tencent headquarters, where the design options you can see, for anyone who doesn't know, MVRDV works a lot with design options and variations, were mainly manually modeled, but they're all in geometrically quite complex. So it's hard to keep track of actually the qualities and the impact between these options. So we built a lot of analytical tools, like here you can see graphs that compare these 4 different options in terms of their floor area and their uniqueness or complexity of resulting floor plans of these envelopes. And we can also then make inventories and look at which buildings are more efficient or less efficient. So this is an inventory of one of the design options of all the unique envelopes within it, and then a scatter plot where we look at plot size over building height, for instance, as a form of FAR or density indicator. Then a large part, of course, is about also making buildings feasible or making designs feasible. So a lot has to do with production as well. In this case, we, for a shopping mall, we built this model in Kangaroo, so in a particle simulation engine in Grasshopper, which has a lot of both the fabrication constraints as well as building constraints embedded. And it's an older project, but I still like this this way to interact with the model as a designer by pulling and dragging and the model pulling back. Also, there's like there are all these rules embedded within it, and they allow you to do what you want to do, but with some pushback if you do things that might be not as reasonable. Yes. Then a second part, another part, of course, that's becoming increasingly important is environmental design. I will show that in more detail in one of the deep dives, so I'll skip over this for now. And then, of course, we also now, especially when working with game engines and so on, we also look at the possibility of 3D models just as spaces for scenario design. So can we capture, this was a vision that we designed some years ago in Bangkok, or for Bangkok, can we collect a series of interventions that we imagine for a city within a single model and experience them either through videos to film or to games and interactive walkthroughs today. Excuse me for a second. No. I'm giving it so please take another. You want to go in? But I couldn't see. You take another one. I'm giving that shot. And I will do. Excuse me. We're still fighting for our meeting rooms even at this time. Here. So we also build like these are experiments around interaction design, where we see one of the directors of MVRDV giving a lecture about new forms of housing in the Netherlands, and in the background we have a computational model which adjusts to comments and feedback of people and to the discussions in real time. So you can again find ways to include people. We do physical prototyping, I'll skip over that. And also, of course, there's this question, I will show that in more detail in the second part, in the deep dives on design interfaces. So if we build new software, how do designers, but also policymakers and a general audience or public engage with these new tools? So before going into the deep dives, I think this is loosely the scope, a way to frame the scope of MVRDV NEXT. within and around the central practice of MVRDV. So we range between applied and speculative projects, from the highly pragmatic to the visionary. And we do projects that are directly integrated within MVRDV's workflow, but we also go out of that to contextualize our work in the general, I guess, developments of the architectural industry, and beyond that, I guess, just the urgencies of the planet. We do that through building custom-specific project solutions. So in practice, what this means is we join design teams in an ongoing project and understand needs for new tools or workflows and develop them together with the design teams and apply them immediately. This has in a way a feedback loop into more general design tools. So if we see that urgencies or issues reoccur from project to project, we build more stable and more general solutions. So we have a suite of design tools on environmental analysis. We have a suite on carbon assessment tools that we built ourselves, and a series of generative design tools for reoccurring architectural propositions from MVRDV. On the other side, on the contextualization side, we do a lot of research in partnerships with, for instance, TU Delft, Tsinghua University in Beijing was recently an interesting research as well, and give lectures, of course, and workshops. And in addition to that, what we call independent research here is mainly just us as Next doing research projects that are not applied as architectural projects, but are either developed and supported by our office internally, or now more recently, we're also doing partnerships here. And I will show one of those in a moment. So this is the kind of like the larger contextualization of where we are and who we are and why we do what we do. And in the second part, now I want to give 5 deep dives of 5 stories on urban envelopes and how technological tools can help to visualize these envelopes, to shape them, and to evaluate them. The first one is actually an academic project. So this is a project I was involved in at the My Factory in Delft, which was looking at, it was called Porosity. And it essentially looked, this is the publication, there's a book that's available as well. And it looked at this question of, so if you have an envelope and you start to open it, what is the impact of this? No? So like in this case, of course, terraces are created. Certain structural complications might be introduced. And basically, what's the threshold and how far can we open up our buildings? How much porosity can we add to while adding quality and yet keeping a building efficient and feasible? So where is this line? And in the first part of it, we built, this was generously sponsored by Lego. So these are actually not 3D models, what you see, but photos of Lego models. And we, as the students, came up with a series of architectural concepts, balconies, walls, cornflakes. We had 25 concepts, I think, and exploring this gradual transformation from the twin tower, from the generic tower, into adding mass and subtracting mass in the 2 directions by following a specific single rule. And what this resulted in this matrix of 625 models in Lego that, in a way, in their thinking were parametric, but were executed intuitively in physical models. And here you can see part of the midterm presentation where we had this big grid and these different design scenarios, purely on the level of, in a way, on a very abstract level of just the design envelope, the architectural envelope. But the studio was very informative for us, I think, also at MVRDV, because of this reduction and because of the introduction of a very clear set of parameters. So in a way, like, how do you define porosity? Porosity is what we found out is defined as the ratio between floor area over terrace area. That's a way to calculate it. So there's also a series of quantifiable metrics were developed here, and actually a Grasshopper plugin was developed in this project on voxelization of buildings. So a lot of the things that we still use today were in a way originating from this research. And in the second part of the studio, we scale these models up. So these are around 2.5 meter tall models of towers in Lego that explore a specific idea of opening up or adding porosity to envelopes through, and these were actually scripted before they were built in Lego. So each of these has a parametric blueprint a certain configuration was picked and then built in Lego. And this part was also executed and exhibited in the faculty of the of Theodore Architecture by the Y Factory. The second one is the Valley in Amsterdam. It's a building that was recently completed and opened, and it's in the Zuidas, so in the business district in the south of Amsterdam. Here you can see that it's at this intersection basically of residential use and offices. And this was the brief for the competition, so Blind with 3 towers. And the architectural concept of MVRDV that in the end won the tender process and is now executed foresaw like this kind of, I guess it's a link or reaction to the Prosody Studio of creating or maximizing the amount of terraces and maximizing the amount of daylight. And as a shape, it's very, very complex, of course. It's very constrained by the footprint of the site, and also, of course, once we went from competition to actually execution, by rules of standardization for the facade modules and also the floor efficiency and so on. So these were the goals, and what we developed here in collaboration with Arup is an algorithm that would explore a genetic algorithm that would explore variations according to the design parameters that are listed here. So views, shadow, acoustics, floor plan, programmatic distribution, and but also the standardization, for example, of facade width modules, not for fabrication later on. And I find this very interesting in the end, because once we ran this algorithm, you create this pool of again virtually infinite design scenarios, and the ones that are performing well, that are visualized in green here, amongst many other things, mainly leverage one thing, which is the difference in the solar arc between the summer and the winter. Because in the summer, you want minimum exposure to reduce cooling in the building, whereas in the winter you want maximum solar exposure to gain wind heat. So this difference in the solar arc is what makes an option here perform well or not. And there was a second step to it once this genetic algorithm came to a conclusion. Of course, again, we don't automate the entire design process, but we ensure a certain amount of agency to the design team here, so you can manually override each of these configurations and get in real time the impact in daylight qualities, terraces, and so on for the project. In the second part, now that once the massing was locked in and defined, we realized that in order to build this, spoke to several facade manufacturers and contractors here in the Netherlands, and it turned out that there was no one who could design a facade that would represent this. So what you can see on the left is a half-stone brick pattern, and I just wanted to show that to also kind of explain like maybe this other side that might look less spectacular on the level of data-driven design, but in the end, even on this level of fabrication of the facade and of these modules, we're still required to build a custom workflow for that. And we did that by bringing the model, which at the time was already in Revit, and extracting all of the metadata and all the information that was already in here as attributes to a model of lines, which we then read out in Grasshopper and did all the optimization to figure out both beautiful as well as functional configuration of this facade, and then translate that back into the model that all of our consultants and collaborators were using. So what this looked like in this is the line model that was exported from Revit or generated from Revit. And again, this has a generative model. So the moment you load in the lines, there's a script in Grasshopper running that allows for the generator proposes an iteration. But again, there is a way for the designer to override that. And here it's basically just by selecting the lines and waiting and looking at it until you find the computer proposes a variation that looks nice. All of the solutions that are generated work in terms of the technical fabrication requirements. And the moment you deselect it, it stores the last configuration. And that's basically the way that you interact with it as a designer. Of course, we also produce schedules from this. This is an overview then of the distribution of different panel heights and widths. And this is the representation of the data model, essentially. So there were 4 different types, A, B, C, D, plus special leftover pieces. And this is the model as it was needed. And the data model behind the scenes that was brought into Revit. And here we can see some photos of the build result, which, in my opinion, the whole messing really lives from the way that this facade is designed. This whole ambition of a kind of natural, if you want to call it natural, appearance lives from, I guess, also a cladding that is randomized, seemingly randomized, while it follows actually quite a lot of technical constraints. The landscaping here, so the terraces are still fresh. That's why the trees are quite small, the shrubs are small. Was designed by Piet Olof, a Dutch landscape architect or landscape designer. And I think it's estimated to be fully grown in the next 5 years. So give it some time to reach its full design intent. Yeah, some impressions of it as it is today. Actually, all of the part, if you make it to Amsterdam to the south, all of the part until here is publicly accessible. So we actually have a plinth that has 2 different 3 unique routes to go up that is completely openly accessible up to this level. The third project, Bastide Nil, also a project that's still an ongoing project now on an urban scale that envisions density, unlike the valley, not by stacking up or going up, but by knitting a closer urban fabric. And this is a project in Bordeaux, in the south of France, that all in all aim to add another 3,500 dwellings, as well as 100,000 square meters of mixed use. So large urban project that was based on here we see the plot, on the strategy of basically using all the leftover space of the train tracks, as well as the empty plots on site. It's an former industrial site, and maximized this. And so you create here a very dense urban fabric, which was at the time against regulation or challenging existing urban regulations within France, especially on the level of minimum road width and daylight qualities. And in order to ensure that, there was a series of steps. The first one was to cut buildings at a 45-degree angle for daylight qualities on neighboring facades, then to add additional cuts along the roads, and towards the neighbors as well, with the adjacent plots, especially here in the south. And what the result of this is 126 unique envelopes that for 126 architects. So MVRDV's role here was the one of a master planner, but this master plan, of course, through the rules that were defined, gave in a way also a very strong imposition on the architectural form in the end. And so therefore, we are still in the process of going from this vision that was generated, this kind of blurry, dreamy videos, images, visuals, into an architectural realization. We can already see here that the first buildings are completed. This is a project that was also executed on the architectural level by MVRDV, and that these qualities actually, these challenging envelopes also generate a completely new architectural quality on the ground and in between. But these ideas are not new, and I think that's something that I'm trying in these 5 deep dives in general to show, is the relationship between research that we do and how that informs design projects, but also the other way around, how we take insights from design projects within the practice and extrapolate them into or turn them into research. So this is a kind of reciprocal or two-directional way. And in a way, if we look at Pharmax, which was already published in 1998, there's already a project on paper, of course, that was imagining this kind of strategy of maximizing plots on the inside of a Dutch perimeter block and then cutting them in order to maximize or to ensure daylight on the public spaces around it. And forgive me for the ugly screenshots in the following next steps, but these are really in progress things that are developed in the office that were not for competitions or design projects, so a bit of a view behind the scenes, which were not published or are not intended to be to become final results. So this is for internal design reviews, just showing that this kind of work, of course, reoccurs in different forms. So this is a high-rise in Rotterdam, where we studied the shadow on this one specific public space here and here. And we can map or quantify in intervals of 5 minutes the amount of shadow that's added through our building. At the same time, we were also starting in another project in the feasibility study to develop these algorithms that were in a way form generative. And all of this together, this was again another project. We went from feasibility study to feasibility study with different design teams in the office. And we realized that there's this kind of new challenge in building these solar envelopes or at the beginning of a project. So maybe to make it a bit more clear, what happened here in several instances in different ways is that clients or developers would approach us with a specific site in mind and being like, okay, so what is feasible here? How many square meters can be built? What kind of projects can we imagine? So like a feasibility study, but challenged by a new rule in the Netherlands, which is in high-rise zones has to do with daylight. And so basically, I'll explain that rule in a moment, in a second, but the challenge generally was that these envelopes could not be easily calculated. So they needed, in a way, there was an existing policy or a new policy that did not come with tools that can actually visualize the effects of that policy. So we developed a series of different approaches and different ways to calculate this and to model and deal with this new policy on daylight from the level of a master plan for Eindhoven or public policy and urban vision for Eindhoven to the architectural scale of the projects I just showed. And all of this together then led to the next research project, which was actually the first research project that was executed by my team of MVRDV NEXT independently, called SolarScape. And SolarScape aimed to spatialize public policy in the form of these what we call possibility envelopes. So just as a disclaimer, the project does not propose to or does not aim to generate design envelopes or architecture envelopes, but envelopes within which architecture can be designed. So the way this would commonly work then with a design team in the office is that we would generate these envelopes, hand them over to a design team, and they would start to look at architectural options that would fit within this envelope, but not take the shape literal necessarily. As I said already, this is a project that is part of our exploration on Datascapes. So we have done now 5 different scapes, so computational / research approaches towards a specific aspect of data, I guess, in architectural design, which really ranges from the level of heritage and how we deal with our own digital archive to urban data models like SolarScape and so on. And I will explain in principle, so this policy that I mentioned, what it meant or what we realized is that there's a shift in the Netherlands happening, but I would assume that we also see similar things in earlier stages in other countries in Europe in particular, where we go from absolute envelope constraints to what we call performative envelope constraints. So in the past, of course, this is the model that we are somewhat familiar with, right? Like a new building has to, for example, in Amsterdam, cannot exceed the maximum height of existing landmarks. You have to have a certain amount of distance, Abstandsfläche from your neighboring buildings. And all of this can be easily calculated. And what we see today on the right is that, for example, in the Netherlands, there's new high-rise vision in a way removes these constraints. It says you can build as high as you want. You can maximize your plot as well, as long as you ensure that the building matches a series of performative criteria. And the one that we pick up here with in the high-rise vision of Rotterdam specifically is about sunlight. And it's about sunlight on public spaces. And we use the voxelization or voxel model. I'll explain that in a second as like how the algorithm that or the computational strategy was developed from our side. But in principle, this is a policy. So a lot of text, a lot of images, but the images are mainly 2D plans. No visualizations or calculations of what this means for the envelopes in the city. And So I'll just show you a series of steps now of how our process works. So this is the high-rise zone in the city center of Rotterdam. Erasmus Bridge is here. There are in total 4 high-rise zones. This is the largest one, so we use that as a case study. And within this high-rise zone, a series of public spaces are defined by the municipality. So these are public spaces that range from, I guess, main mobility infrastructure to recreational spaces for sport or bars, leisure, and so on. And therefore, each of these spaces, public spaces, also has a different description of its requirements. So some might be, all of them include, or all of them share that new developments cannot add additional sunlight, additional shadow to these sites, but some would define that in the early morning, others in the afternoon, and others again in the evening or throughout the entire day. And this makes it both hard for, it's a good rule, but it makes it hard for developers to imagine now on a new plot, how can we ensure that these spaces are not deteriorated. And it also makes it, in a way, hard for policymakers to define these high-rise zones, because you cannot, these sunspots, because you cannot, how do you know while drawing it, whether it enables or prevents all possible developments in the neighborhood, if it has any effect at all, or if it has a too strong effect. And so this is where we position this research project in between. And the strategy, like in principle, was operating in the following way, that we extruded each of these plots, rasterized the maximum extrusion of it. I think we took 250 meters here, and looked at each of these voxels, so volumetric pixels, as a discrete element of a potential building, and analyzed the quality or the impact that this voxel would have on its surroundings. We then define a threshold, and this is of course all parametric, so you can change that threshold, and subtract all the voxels or all the parts of a potential building that would be more negative than the threshold. And what remains is, if we do this operation, is on the one hand, so this was the maximum extrusion of 250 meters, and what remains is the possible densification of the city without adding shadow in these public spaces. So a direct visualization of this public policy. But in addition to, and okay, we can also map the potential. We can of course calculate the existing floor area over the new floor area, how much can be added. So what's the potential of actually redeveloping a specific project here. But I guess more importantly than that, we can also start to change the thresholds of these tolerances. So we can say, what if we add 15 minutes to this of shadow to these sunspots around it? What if we add 30 minutes or 60 minutes? And we can then start to negotiate between policymaker, developer, and architect. Because again, all sides in a way like these policies are can also benefit from this kind of feedback cycle. And of course, there are other ways to also, in the moment you can start to negotiate here to mitigate qualities. No? For example, you can add green on the rooftops, you can make accessible plinths. There are other ways that a building can compensate 10 minutes, 15 minutes of shadow that it adds to the city in the architectural quality of the project, which then in the end might make this plot feasible, no? Financially feasible for development. This is particularly critical in Rotterdam at the moment, because the Netherlands is facing a housing crisis. Densification is needed as part of a larger strategy, of course, to add new housing. In Rotterdam in particular has the aim to add another additional 50,000 new apartments in the coming 10 years. So then this can be one strategy amongst many to look at densification. But for this, we need to look at it also on the level of the building policy and not only in the capacity of architects and designers. And this is how we imagined at the time how these kind of computational models could feed in as basically negotiators or real-time feedback of a building policy, which then allows developers and municipalities to come into dialogue. And rather than taking these policies as like hard-written facts, to look at them also as something that's changeable, that's soft, that can be negotiated, evaluated, refined through spatialization and the quantification of these spatial models. And when we spoke about this with municipalities, what was interesting is, especially here in Rotterdam, that they were they got very excited by it, and primarily on the level of spatializing it, or visualizing a building policy. It's like no one, even the people who wrote the policy, could not imagine what it would look like. And I'm showing these photos not just because we went, so when we realized that this is maybe the strongest asset of the project, we went one step further, and we, for the exhibition of the International Architecture Biennale here in Rotterdam, which just closed as well last month, we built a physical model of the city of Rotterdam, and we added all these possible envelopes in the zero tolerance. So this is the direct visualization of the building policy to the model. And here you can see part of my team at the exhibition and exploring the model. So that's, I think, another key topic also in the work of us is, as MVRDV NEXT, is this ambition of how to make technology, how to reduce complexity by using technology, and therefore making it more accessible to people, to make it more understandable, and in a way use technology as a way to filter this complexity or pre-process it to develop narratives that are clear, engaging, and understandable. Here we can see a short video which we made at the time. I'll, I think, skip the first part, which shows these 4 high-rise zones in Rotterdam, in the south and in the center of the city, and mainly maybe skip to the middle part. At the time the project had a different name, which shows this algorithm, which would basically, for each of the sites, each of the plots in the center, I think we had around 180 different developable plots, would calculate in an automated fashion these new envelopes of the city. And yeah, again, no, like you can, once you have them, you can also, again, this is not a proposal for a city, but we can visualize it, we can make it experienceable, and in a way also create this provocation or ask this question back to the city: is this the future that you imagine by writing this policy? That brings me to, I think, the last deep dive. I have one more, depending on how we are in terms of time and energy, but the last one that I planned, which is Roofscape. That's a project that also falls into this group of Datascape research that we are running here at MVRDV NEXT. And we just completed this first phase 2 weeks ago. And it looks at the existing urban fabric, again, on the basis of Rotterdam. And this is a research project that was actually a collaboration both with the municipality of Rotterdam, as well as with a smaller, younger design firm from Rotterdam architectural practice called Superworld. And I thought it's interesting to show this, basically to highlight what I mentioned earlier, like this process of how research can be born out of architectural projects. And MVRDV had this dream of activating the rooftops of the city for a very long time already. And this can be seen especially through realized architectural prototypes. And I think this is very interesting about this research in our context, that it's not one that remained on paper, but it was actually always supported by realized projects, such as the Didden Village, which is a private rooftop extension here in Rotterdam in 2006. But then also exploring the potentials for access to this new landscape on top of the roof. So this is the central station of Rotterdam. And over the summer of 2016, we had a temporary installation of a public stair that would prototype new forms of access, you know, to these rooftops. And this festival was called the Stairs to Criterion, was then matched also with a series of screenings, lectures, and public events on the rooftops here that would talk about the future of Rotterdam. So a new platform in the most literal sense for inclusive discussions on the future of the city. And then more recently, this summer, we had the activation of the Neue Institute. So this is one of our projects here in Rotterdam. I showed it in the beginning, the depot. Next to that, we had this pink pop-up, which again was about event space for lectures and discussions and film screenings, on top of the Neue Institute in Rotterdam, which is like the, I guess, center on exhibitions, bookshop, and discussions and lectures on architecture, urbanism, and I guess now more recently also fashion, new media, digital culture, and etc. And there was like this top-up over the summer, which again explored the external access as well. In addition to that, we also had a prototype that explored connectivity of rooftops. This was also this summer in another part of Rotterdam, where we had a series of, like it was called the rooftop walk, that prototypes like how this new layer on the top of the city can also be interconnected and continuous. And so all of these kind of architectural prototypes or processes, then out of that we understood that we need to think about this more systematically as well. So they are on them, and the first way this was done by our colleagues last year is in the form of the Rooftop Catalog, which is a book that is published also. I think it's available in most architectural book clubs now, which imagines or makes an inventory of I think more than 100 different design scenarios of what could take place on top of rooftops or architectural private developments, residential buildings, but also public buildings, and looking at different architectural typologies and how they could be extended on the rooftops. At the same time, also our partner in this collaboration called Superworld, they had a research project called Superdam, which was essentially a GIS-based research that would look at a series of different data attributes of the city and measure the potential for densification with regards to housing for Rotterdam. So together with them, we teamed up to develop this project, Roofscape. It's a prototype for a rooftop activation strategy, but we actually built both the computational workflow here as well as a fully standalone design tool, which was built in Unity, which is a game engine that is used now, I think, increasingly by architectural firms as well. And I'll try to just show a 2-minute video to introduce the project. And if there are questions afterwards, I have some slides to go deeper, but let's try this first.
Rotterdam has been dreaming about its rooftops for a while now. Already, a new layer of urban activity is emerging on top of the city. Roofscape is a digital tool that supports the making of rooftop strategies. How can we help uncover the hidden potential of rooftop landscapes? How can we foster their development through policies and strategies? How can we identify a variety of rooftop programs that work together and show their positive impact on the city? How do we envision rooftop strategies that are created and used by everyone? Let's explore the Roofscape prototype. An interactive open application that generates insights on the basis of extensive urban data sets. Users can select target areas in the Explorer, load all relevant data sets for the target area, and calculate the target area's rooftop capacities. They can also visualize the rooftop capacity for a single program and make adjustments according to their specific limitations. Roofscape's Scenario Maker combines all activity potentials at once and allows users to adjust these activities according to specific urban needs. Need hard numbers? The tool calculates them and shows impact in real time. The methodology for these calculations is outlined in detail within the openly accessible Roofscape report. Roofscape is an ongoing interdisciplinary collaboration between the City of Rotterdam, MVRDV, and Superworld. Want to know more or join us? The application and a detailed report are openly available at the link in the description below.
Yes, so again, I guess as a collaboration, as the video said, is ongoing. So both the application itself as well as the report, which is showing all the different data layers of the city and also how they are correlated, is completely open and accessible, and both can be downloaded from our Google Drive through this link if there's interest. Otherwise, just contact me under this email address and we can also share the links directly. So just using this platform also to promote. And I think that, so we're now at a phase in this project where we're looking for new partnerships. We're working on expanding it from Rotterdam to a larger or nationwide Dutch network. We have been talking with 8 different municipalities about this at the time, but we're also having links, for example, having early acquisition talks with some British cities where we might bring it to the UK. So it's completely open, and I think at this point we're just trying to find partners to use the tool more, so completely accessible. If there's anyone who this resonates with, like, please get in touch with us.